Welcome back into the closing segment of the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast with our next guest, Robbie Veno. Rob, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I am good today, Drew. How about yourself?
I'm good, man. We're closing this College Football Every Game on the Board podcast out. And Robbie, you've had a good year, especially with the top plays, 24-13, 65% year to date. And we're doing a special coupon code with Robbie. It's Veno half. That's VENOHALF at checkout for half off of any of Rob Veno's all access packages. That's 3, 7, 30-day, 90-day, whatever. Half off, Veno half at checkout. We're going 185 all the way to the end of the card on the college football betting board. So start off 185, 186, Iowa at Penn State here, Robbie. Looks like 52 the total, with the Nittany Lions laying 6.5 at home. Yeah, and
we picked a pretty good time to start with this section of the board, Drew, because this number is bouncing back and forth amongst offshores right now. Saw a fast move to Penn State -7 about 10 minutes ago. Now we see as low as -6 at Chris, Iowa buyback. This other sevens came back to 6.5. So a little bit of two-way action here showing up on the Iowa-Penn State game here this afternoon. I think first and foremost, rain. Not necessarily rain during the game. It is going to rain during the game. It'll be somewhat softened, but there's going to be heavy rains at State College all throughout the night and into the day. The 3:30 start time here, I think the percentages were down to about 56% chance of rain at that point. Like I say, it's probably going to rain throughout this game, just not as big of a chance as there is from what's a type of nor'easter that's coming through here Friday afternoon through Friday evening. You wonder about the field conditions here, Drew, taking that much water on before this game. We'll see if that has an effect. I love to throw these numbers out there, but let's throw this one out. If you bet Iowa State for the game, for the first half, and for the second half, every single week this year, you're 17-4 against the spread. Iowa is 6-1 ATS game-wise. Full game-wise, they're 6-1 in first halves this year against the spread. They're 5-2 in second halves. They've been a definite bankroll builder all season long. They haven't faced an offense real close to what Penn State's going to bring here, though. Penn State's so balanced, 240 on the ground, 240 through the air. And as good as Iowa State's run defense is, and it's really good, Penn State ran for 205 on Michigan State's second-ranked run defense last week. So Penn State's got the arsenal to do some damage against an Iowa team that hasn't faced an accomplished offense like this both ways all season long. They also haven't faced a dual-threat quarterback of this magnitude all season long. So it'll be an interesting test for the Iowa D. But there's troubles for Penn State, too. Obviously, they haven't been good as of late. Their last three opponents, Ohio State, Michigan State, and Indiana, have all lit them up through the air, 294, 295, and 330. And Nate Stanley's been real good, Drew. Surprise for Iowa to many people. The way he's played quarterback, especially throwing the football, it brings an added dimension that they just haven't had in a lot of years at Iowa. I think one telling number here, both of these teams have played Indiana the last 2 weeks. A couple weeks ago, Iowa went to Indiana and they won 42-16. Last week, Penn State went to Indiana. They barely escaped, 33-28. Iowa held that team to 330 yards. Penn State gave Indiana 554 total yards. So it's kind of a back-and-forth matchup here. For me, I would prefer taking the points, Drew. If you can grab these 6.5s, and in fact, as I talk to you and analyze this game, we see the number bouncing down now to Penn State -6. So certainly a surplus of Iowa money coming in here this afternoon. It's the way I would lean. If you can find the 6.5s, and there are multiple ones still available, and you like the Iowa side, go ahead and play it now. If you're looking to bet Penn State, it looks like this number's coming down, so you might be able to wait a little bit.
Yeah, it was at 7, 6.5, and you're right. Bookmakers at 6 now. Jazz is at 6 as well. The others at 6.5. So this one catching a lot of movement in the marketplace right now. Staying in the Big Ten, Robbie, 187, 188. Purdue at Michigan State, 49.5 the total, with Sparty laying 1.5 in East Lansing.
I promise I'll only do this a couple more times here, Drew, but this is even better point spread wise than what I just gave you for Iowa. If you have bet Purdue the last 5 weeks blindly, bet them against the spread for the game, bet them against the spread first half, bet them against the spread second half, you're 14-0 with one push, 100% winners. You just mechanically cash tickets with this team. 5-0 their last 5 games against the points, 4-0 in a push in the first half, 5-0 second half. Michigan State's the antithesis of that. If you played them all 3 ways every game this season, you're 4-15-2, only 21% winners. So it's certainly a difference in against the spread numbers, a huge difference in against the spread numbers between these two teams this season. Michigan State's going to be the best overall defense by the numbers that Purdue sees this year. However, their defense is so skewed by the rush numbers, Drew. Like I said earlier, this is a number 2 ranked run defense in the nation, but their pass defense is 117th, giving up 275, 276 yards per game. And you have David Blau, Rondale Moore and company coming in here to attack that defense. Just not good. The fundamental matchup, Purdue offense, what they do best, against Michigan State defense, what they do worst, just does not work for the Spartans in this particular contest. Purdue, however, pass defense even worse, 127th in the nation. They haven't stopped many people. They played some really potent offenses, but still, their air defense hasn't been good. So what comes into question here, Drew, is the status of number 1 quarterback for Michigan State, Brian Lewerke. Now, he's listed on their depth chart for this week's game as the number 1 quarterback for this contest. However, we've seen a question mark next to his name all week long because of the shoulder injury that he played through against Michigan last week. And just reading a few more articles, it looks like the beat writers and guys that are inside Michigan State football, they really think it might be redshirt freshman Rocky Lombardi to quarterback this game for Michigan State. So keep an eye on the starting quarterback for MSU here. Lombardi, for those who don't know, he's quarterbacked 2 drives all season long. First one was a 3-play drive against Central Michigan. They lost 14 yards on those 3 plays. And the second one was the last drive of the game last week against Michigan where, Michigan State winds up gaining 48 yards on his drive, but 44 were from penalties. Michigan committed 4 penalties in a row for 44 yards. Lombardi only, with him at the helm, they only gained 4 yards on that drive against a very tough Michigan defense. So we'll see here. There are some thoughts out there that maybe Michigan State will try and open up their offense. We'll see how this goes. Certainly they do pass the ball well with Lewerke, though, so this could be, if Lewerke goes, this could be a little bit of a shootout between David Blau, Brian Lewerke, and if they let Lombardi loose, maybe it turns out the same way. Total here is low. I see as low as 49.5 out there, and I'm sure that's due to the Brian Lewerke injury situation. So if you want to be a little proactive and think you're going to see 2 pass defenses get lit up, maybe over is a good way to go there.
Robbie, let's head to Conference USA. We got 189-190 FIU, the Golden Panthers at Western Kentucky. 3.5 FIU's laying on the road, 54 the total.
Yeah, let's talk about James Morgan a little bit here, Drew, because James Morgan, the Indiana transfer, the Bowling Green transfer, has been real good. I didn't realize he's number 7 in the nation in quarterback rating right now, 168.2. His last 3 weeks have been phenomenal, and Florida International is picking up a little steam here as far as Conference USA standings are concerned. Butch Davis has his team right in the thick of things. They have to go to Hilltopper Country this week, lay 3.5 on the road. It's a difficult situation, I think, mindset-wise for Western Kentucky as somebody who had that game over the total last week and saw the way that game ended. For those who don't know, Western Kentucky set up to kick a game-winning field goal at the end of that game. The kick fell short, and ODU returned that missed field goal 91 yards, and on top of the 91-yard return, got a face mask penalty. And what they did, obviously, was just set up for their own game-winning field goal and punched it in 137-35. Very tough loss for WKU. Davis Shanley at quarterback played as good as he's played all season long in that contest. But this might be a little bit different against FIU's defense, which has been tough. For those betting totals in Florida International games, they've played 4 straight under the number. And just to give you another little second half deal here for those who play these first half, second halves, that's why I throw these numbers out there. Florida International is 7-0 straight up in second halves. Butch Davis doing a great job as far as game adjustments are concerned, as indicated by this number. FIU 1-6, terrible against the spread in the first half, 6-1 against the spread in the second half. So obviously whatever Butch Davis is doing at halftime, like I say, to adjust game plans is working for this team. In the end, probably the Florida International ground game against Western Kentucky's run defense is the deciding factor here. FIU can run it now that they're healthy. They've got a two-headed tandem of Shondarius Phillips and Napoleon Maxwell that share the ball well, share the carries well, and have been putting up pretty good yardage for this team. So maybe that's the difference here. I think FIU's on the upswing. Western Kentucky probably not as bad as the 1-6 record indicates.
Robbie, we head to the AAC 1-9-1, 1-9-2, Cincinnati at SMU. Looks like Cincy laying 8.5, 49.5 the total.
Yeah, interested in SMU, the back half of the schedule here, Drew, because last week against Tulane, they got all of their starting receivers back that had been on the injured list. James Proch had been the number one receiver, is the number one receiver for SMU, but had to do everything on his own for about 3 days. In fact, to the point where head coach Sonny Dykes said that the quarterbacks were just targeting Proch and nobody else on the field, and it was getting a little bit easy to defend even though he was making so many catches. He was just getting an insane amount of targets. He's the only receiver that SMU QBs trusted. But Ben Hicks, who's now back to being the full-time starter, there's been kind of a back and forth between him and William Brown. It looks like Hicks is the guy right now. Now he's got the full complement back, and I'm just interested to see what this air raid offense does with all of their receivers healthy. They win last week against Tulane, underdog outright victory. Don't do much yardage-wise, though. Only 327 for the game, 291 through the air. The defense played real well, surprisingly, for SMU. And I think it's notable that SMU's played a really, in my mind at least, for their level of talent, a really difficult schedule. Played North Texas, who they're not better than. Played TCU in the second game of the year when TCU was really good. Played Michigan. They've played Central Florida. Cincinnati's done nothing wrong all season long and really didn't do anything wrong in their loss in overtime to Temple last week. But I'm just curious to see how SMU's offense evolves with all the receivers back for the second half of the season.
Robbie, let's head to the SEC. We got Vandy at Arkansas. Maybe safe to say the bottom half of the SEC, maybe the bottom 2 teams in the SEC, with Vandy laying 1.5, 53 the total, Robbie.
Yeah, we went through some absolutely horrible Vanderbilt defensive numbers last week. And they played Kentucky real well on the defensive side. They came off of a 3-game skid in SEC play where they allowed over 500 yards each and every game. And last week against Kentucky, 14-7, very respectable game played by Vanderbilt in that contest. They cover the number. Kentucky had been coming off a bye and seemed rested and ready to go ahead and maybe cover that number, but it didn't work out that way. Vandy holds them to 298 total yards. It's a little bit skewed, that number, Drew, because Kentucky only threw the ball 9 times. So 18 passing yards out of that 298. They did run for 280 yards on the Vanderbilt defense. So despite the fact that the number wasn't 500 plus allowed, I think the 280 on the ground speaks volumes when you combine that with 292 on the ground by Florida the week before, 219 from Georgia the week before. It's a Vanderbilt defense that right now is a little bit run down. Talked a little bit on the podcast yesterday about how to be careful and watch out for these teams that have not had a bye yet. Vandy's one of those. Vandy's bye does not come until next week, the November 3rd Saturday, which will make this their 9th consecutive game without a bye and a defense that's wearing down. could be troublesome against Arkansas. For those who are fans of the Netflix Last Chance U series, you probably know right now that Rakeem Boyd, who was I think he's featured in that Independence Community College series, Season 3. Rakeem Boyd, next Michigan recruit, has taken over the starting job for Arkansas, somewhat due to injuries to Devah Whaley. But he's played quite a bit over the course of the last month, and he's averaging 7 a pop. So Vandy's run defense, I think, could be victimized by Arkansas here. Arkansas's turned to a freshman quarterback as Chad Morris tries to, maneuver pieces in his first season. I can't get behind Vandy right now, Drew. Arkansas is not a great way to go either. They haven't been a successful point spread team this year, but just the fact that it looks like Vanderbilt, which has been anchored on defense forever under Derek Mason, just the fact that defense has worn down such, and Arkansas does have a true running threat here, I think that could cause them problems.
Robbie, heading to the Big 12, we got Kansas State heading on the highway to Norman to take on Oklahoma. 64 the total. The Sooners laying 24.5 at home.
Yeah, it's been bumped up from 22, and probably for obvious reasons, Drew. I mean, you really don't want to be the Kansas State secondary against this Oklahoma passing game. Kansas State, in years past, they could do what they've attempted to do this year, which is Bill Snyder's history, which is to methodically slow down a game, grind down the clock, hang in there, cover numbers, even win straight up against teams that they're not supposed to beat. But that's just not happening for Kansas State this year. The offense, despite the fact that they have 2 veteran quarterbacks returning, has not been good, and they just don't have enough potency to keep up with somebody like Oklahoma, who scores on anybody. Question becomes, the number here, 24.5. I could see Oklahoma getting out real quick in this game and never looking back. Obviously, Lincoln Riley is one of those head coaches who does not take his foot off the gas pedal. Even when Oklahoma runs the football, it's still kind of like running up the score in the fourth quarter because they run the football so well. I don't know what KSU, aside from forcing turnovers, can do to prevent a blowout here. I think Oklahoma's fully focused. That Texas loss really woke them up. They got the bye at the right time. Can't play against Oklahoma in this case, Drew. You looked at the total because any game featuring Oklahoma, you go in with the idea that they can get the 40 on anybody. Can KSU get you the rest of the points? Oklahoma may be able to get more than 40 here, but 64 might be in too good of a place to make a bet either way.
Robbie, in the Sun Belt, we got Arkansas State at UL Lafayette. Arkansas State laying 3 on the road, 70.5 the total. Can Arkansas State finally bounce back? What's your take on this one?
Well, boy, they showed it last week, right, in that weekday game. Finally, the offense broke out, and it's what we were waiting for Justice Hansen to be Justice Hansen, waiting for Warren Wand and company to move the football the way we've seen them move it last couple of seasons. I don't know why it took so long up until last week, but against this UL Lafayette defense, which is absolutely brutal, 459 yards per game allowed. Lafayette, let's give them some credit, though. Good game last week played by their defense against Appalachian State. Certainly Appalachian, the much better team, goes in as a 25-point favorite, only scores 27 points for the whole game, and Lafayette allows 36 per contest. So the defense bowed up a little bit. I would consider that to be more of a mirage than a reality. I think the bettors in this particular case consider it more of a mirage than a reality, as indicated by the total and the way it's moved from 64 all the way to 70 and a half. Folks looking more for those UL Lafayette shootouts here because their offense is so good. Trey Regis at running back and the way they run the football. I don't know if I can get there over 70 and a half, Drew, though. Arkansas State, to me, has played good enough defense to at least deserve some credit where that number is concerned. I don't know that Lafayette, which has to get started, their offense has to have a running game in order to become balanced. And if Arkansas State can stiffen up at the line of scrimmage, they know it as well as anybody. We might see a lot of 8 in the box against Regis and company here. I just don't know that this line hasn't been pushed too far. Now, that being said, off of what I saw last week, it might not be that far-fetched to figure Arkansas State for 48, 49 in this game, and then Lafayette just has to come in and clean up the rest, which they can certainly do. I think the line in this instance, only -3, to me appears real cheap. I've got one side in Arkansas State that, if you're coming from the angle that I'm coming from and you believe the offense is improved enough, then you've got a team that's far more balanced in all three phases than UL Lafayette is, with their run-oriented offense and not much of a defense. So to me, 3 looks cheap. Sun Belt contest, I would think that Arkansas State, the better of the two teams, worth a shot there.
Yeah, I agree with you. We got 2 likely bottom 10 teams in Division I college football. New Mexico State at Texas State, 54.5 the total, 2.5 the Bobcats at Texas State laying at home.
Yeah, I mean, are you willing to, Drew? I don't know that you could be willing to lay anything with Texas State right now. I mean, Everett Withers, to stop the laughter and the sarcasm here with Texas State, to his credit, Everett Withers has not done a bad job with this team. Let's remember that a couple of weeks ago against Georgia Southern on a Thursday night game, this Texas State defense pretty much clamped down on that Georgia Southern running game. And I think, I'm not staring at the numbers right now, but I'm pretty sure that it was the worst rushing production numbers Georgia Southern had put up all season long. Came against Texas State. They wind up losing that game just 15-13 because they're so inept offensively. They just can't get anything going. Withers, he wants to run that 80-plus plays per game. They want to get to the line and move it around with guys in space, that type of spread offense, but personnel just not working. Starts with the quarterback, runs all the way through the entire lineup. But defensively, boy, the last 2 weeks, much, much better. Louisiana Monroe with Caleb Evans is a potent offense. They only scored 20 against Texas State. New Mexico State has found a hot hand at quarterback. I said that last week. And it proved true again against Georgia Southern as that game winds up 48-31. But Josh Adkins at quarterback, one more time, 25 of 38, 295. So they are throwing it around pretty well right now. Just can't stop anybody whatsoever. It's kind of the theme of a lot of Sun Belt defenses. I took a look, Drew, at this game to go over the total, solely because I don't know that New Mexico State can stop anybody at this point in time, and at 54.5, the number looks very reasonable. Texas State might have shut down the one-dimensional Georgia Southern running game, but the weakness may be in the pass defense, and that's where New Mexico State's going to attack. So I'm still looking, maybe over 54.5 is the right way to go there.
Robbie, heading to the Big 12, we got Texas Tech at Iowa State, 56 the total. Iowa State laying 3.5 in Ames.
The great news for Tech is that Alan Bowman, their quarterback, was cleared to fly. So he will be the starting quarterback this week. He played last week, but it was a home game. He came back. I think that was a little unexpected too, Drew, his return to the lineup. It didn't really come across that news until very, very late, almost game time. And he winds up throwing for 408 yards. And when he's on the field, Texas Tech is as explosive as anybody. But Iowa State's been through the ringer this year, and they've come up roses in a lot of situations. Brock Purdy, their backup third-team quarterback, freshman quarterback, has stepped in and done an outstanding job. David Montgomery back now at running back. They can push it. I'm still not a firm believer in Texas Tech's defensive numbers. I knew, when we did these preseason forecasts, the Big 12 forecasts on Sportsmemo during the summer, indicated that Texas Tech probably would be a much improved defensive team off of the improvement that they made last year. David Gibbs, defensive coordinator, has been real good there. But I don't know that I believe wholeheartedly in the numbers, Drew. I think the numbers are still a little bit too low for what Texas Tech's defensive ability really is. Iowa State's multidimensional enough to expose it. I'm very, very surprised that the number has come down from 58 to 56. Maybe it's, maybe Iowa State can slow this game down, but I don't know. They're so capable of scoring points. And when you go into a Texas Tech game, the mindset is we have to get to the 30s to beat that team. because no lead's ever safe against Tech. So I don't know. To me, 56 a wrong move, and I may get involved with over 56 in that contest.
Right, we've got a Mountain West fair here. Boise State at Air Force. Looks like the Broncos laying 9.5 on the highway, 58 the total. I'll tell you, Air Force last week against UNLV, they kind of dominated the game, yet weren't able to cover. Almost did at the end, but I think this Air Force team kind of catching stride here. Catching 9.5 might be worth a look. Although Boise State, the more talented team. How do you feel betting this one?
Yeah, I think both of them had weak defensive opponents last week. I mean, Boise State made it look too easy against Colorado State. They even had a freak touchdown where their running back fumbles, just happens to go right into a guy's hands who's running behind the play 2 yards. I think it was a punt return, as a matter of fact, and that went the distance. Colorado State just couldn't get out of their own way. And the same for UNLV defensively, couldn't get out of their way against a Air Force rushing attack and an offense that put up 572 yards. When's the last time we saw Air Force throw for 217? Yep. That speaks volumes to, how poor UNLV's defense is. But I'm with you, Drew. Air Force has been through this quarterback carousel. Isaiah Sanders, Arian Wortham. Right now, they're at Isaiah Sanders, which is the guy I've thought all along. And it's somewhat due to injury that they wind up with Sanders. And it's due to injury that they had to go through this carousel. But Sanders is a good thrower of the football, and he's real good on that running that option offense. So I like him. And for the most part, like what Air Force has been able to do defensively the last few weeks. Navy, they played well. San Diego State, they played well. Last week, they got banged around in pass defense a little bit. But Brett Rippon and Boise State, they just haven't been consistent enough in their games this year to get behind them. Last week was one of those typical Boise blowouts, but they've been few and far between. I think I'd be with you here on Air Force plus the points. Like I say, what they've been able to do on the defensive side of the football so far the last 3 weeks has been fairly impressive and might be enough, because Boise still has to defend that triple option, and it's not that easy. With Sanders showing us last week that he can throw for 217, Boise's got to be thinking about that too.
Robbie, moving down the card here, we got a big one in the ACC. Clemson at Florida State. Clemson laying 17 in Tallahassee, 51 the total.
Listen, there's no way Willie Taggart should have opened his mouth to start the week off, Drew. I mean, you just can't. You're going to challenge 4 NFL defensive linemen and say that you don't think it, paraphrasing here, that it poses a threat that they can do not whatever they want to do, but that they can handle that. That's not going to happen. I think what Dabo Swinney said is more accurate when he said that he believes his offense – he said this before the last game against NC State. He thinks his offense is going to break out because they're capable of running it on anybody and they're capable of throwing it on anybody if they choose to stop the run. What's FSU going to stop here? I know it's a good defense, but so was NC State's up until last week. And Trevor Lawrence, the move to the freshman quarterback was the right move as the Tigers were to move on this season. And obviously they were looking at the bigger picture, the 14 playoff with Lawrence. But they do have such balance. And then the defensive side of the football, they mauled NC State last week. Now, NC State might not have been ready, tested-wise, battle-tested enough for that contest against Clemson. But it just goes to show you that when their mindset is right, they are one of the 4 best teams in the nation. FSU doing absolutely nothing to brag about offensively still. I mean, sure, they beat Wake Forest last week, but Wake Forest has absolutely zero depth on the defense due to injury at this point in time. In fact, you had them prior to the bye talking about how they just had no linebackers left. Now, a couple came back against FSU, but they're running around banged up. FSU, if they were any good, should have done more. I don't see any reason to bet on Florida State here, especially since they provide bulletin board material. I think at this point in time, for Clemson to stay involved in these rankings, they have to have these impressive performances against perceived decent teams in the ACC because they're just not going to get a chance to play anybody good the rest of the way out. So I think foot's on the gas pedal here from Dabo Swinney, and Clemson wins going away.
Robbie, we got Navy at Notre Dame up next, 54.5 the total, with Notre Dame laying 24 in South Bend, or actually this one in San Diego. And I hate laying big points to any military academy, but Notre Dame, extra time. I just feel like they're going to do whatever they want to this Navy defense. The only way I could look here is to lay, you can find it 23.5, but that's how I would bet it. How do you feel?
Yeah, you have to worry about the Navy pass defense, too. I mean, ever since Ian Book was inserted at quarterback, the offense for Notre Dame has become so balanced, you don't know what to defend first. And the fact is that Notre Dame doesn't lose a lot in the quarterback run game with Ian Book there. Obviously, he's not as good of a runner as Wimbush was, but he's still more than capable of gaining the yardage from the quarterback position that they need out of their option when they have designed quarterback run plays called. So they're clicking on all cylinders right now. I think Navy's pass defense will have a heck of a time keeping up with the Notre Dame receivers here. Question for Notre Dame, of course, and Brian Kelly has said that he likes this defense as much as any defense he's had at Notre Dame. They've suffered through a lot of injuries during his tenure. They had a couple of defensive back injuries this year, but they've played pretty well. But defending the triple option is still a problem. It looks like Malcolm Perry is going to go at quarterback for Navy, which is significant. They need Malcolm Perry at quarterback. He's a big play threat in the running game. They'll score a couple, Drew, but I'm with you. Notre Dame could probably write their own score in this game, and any team coming off of a bye, as long as there's no rust, especially Notre Dame, seeing how this playoff 4-team format is shaping up, they need an impressive win. I'm a little bit surprised the total's as low as it is. I feel like Notre Dame can get to 45, and when you're talking about over 54.5, you need 10 out of Navy. I don't think that's too much to ask.
Robbie, we got a Pac-12 matchup here, cross-division. Oregon at Arizona. This one 65 the total, with the Ducks laying 9.5 on the highway.
Yeah, Khalil Tate maybe not. Otherwise, you get Rich Rod's son at quarterback. Arizona's a mess, Drew, and it's understandable, I guess, because the program wasn't there, wasn't up to Arizona standards when he walked in. I mean, what Rich Rodriguez had left behind wasn't the ingredients for a successful season for Arizona. So in comes Sumlin and his different style of offense, and certain things have gone wrong for them. They just don't have the manpower right now. Oregon, to me, I know that people who argue the other side of this game and want to play Arizona will say they'll go to the situational argument, which is Oregon off of the loss at Pullman last week, which was a huge game in the North Division of the Pac-12, and maybe Oregon doesn't get up off the mat, but I'm just not gonna. I don't believe that. I think Oregon will get up off the mat here. I think Justin Herbert and this offense. You talk about offenses that could probably name the score. I think this offense against the Arizona defense can do whatever they want. One bad injury situation for Oregon heading into last week's game was when they lost their true freshman starting left tackle. Imagine that, true freshman walking in and starting at left tackle for Oregon, and he had played so well. They lost him prior to the Washington State game. Might have taken a week to get adjusted into a new left tackle here. Certainly it's not the best place to go up to the Palouse and have to play an important game. But I think they bounce back strong here, Drew. The number's held at 9.5. I think I'll probably be on Oregon in some way, shape, or form.
Robbie, last game here, we got Hawaii, Fresno State. Hawaii traveling to the mainland. 60 the total, 24.5 Fresno State laying at home.
Certainly capable is Hawaii through the passing game, but they haven't been the same since maybe the first 4 games of the season. Cole McDonald got hurt in between there for one contest where we saw Chevin Cordero come in, the true freshman for Hawaii. I think he beat Wyoming that night in a low-scoring game. But their offense just hasn't been quite the same. They lose last week to Nevada, only scored 22 points at home. And Nevada obviously has improved on the defensive side, but still there were some drop balls in that game, Drew, that you just didn't see to start the season out of John Ursua and company. That wide receiving core is so good. Like I say, they're capable, kind of like the mid-'70s boxer Ernie Shavers, who, could knock you out with any punch, but usually didn't win fights, or at least big fights. The knockout punch could be there, but Fresno State's defense has been so good. You look close at them, they've allowed 12.5 points per game this year under Jeff Tedford, only 88 points allowed in 7 games all season long. And they handled a New Mexico offense last week with Sharon Jones at quarterback that had been playing really well on the offensive side. So I just think Fresno is head and shoulders above probably the rest of this league, to tell you the truth. I think they're better than Boise. I think they're better than San Diego State. As long as they get decent quarterback play out of McMarion, they're usually going to win ball games. So I don't want to play Hawaii here. The total's going up a little bit, which is kind of intriguing too, because I think Hawaii's pass offense, especially in pass protection, could be in a little bit of trouble this week. One thing to note for Fresno State, how about they've only allowed 5 quarterback sacks all season long? The chances of Hawaii getting to the Fresno quarterback are 0 to none this week.
Robbie, we got that's it for the Every Game on the Board podcast. But guys, want to remind you of the coupon code Veno half. That's half off of any all access package with Rob Veno. Robbie, anything you want to throw out before we shut this down?
You know what? We'll be back tomorrow, Drew. We'll do some NFL, but as always, long college football weekend starts tonight. We just want to wish all the listeners here good luck on their weekend bets, and hopefully we're, adding some form of logic or helpful ticket cashing and knowledge to their already process.
Absolutely. Good job breaking this down, and we do have a bunch of games on the podcast for Thursday and Friday night if you're listening to this and looking for some action on those games. So it's just earlier in the segments as far as the college football Every Game on the Board podcast goes. But like Robbie said, we'll be back tomorrow with the NFL version of Every Game on the Board podcast.